Well, I want to welcome you all to the first TAM customer webinar delivered since VMware has joined Broadcom, and this will also be our last webinar of 2023. We've had some great webinars this year. I'm certain that today will be another of the same. This webinar is organized by the TAM organization with the goal of providing content that will be helpful to you in getting the most out of your VMware investment, and with today's focus, to do that securely. Please make use of the Q&A feature to ask any questions. And if your question doesn't get addressed today, be sure to reach out to your TAM and ask them for follow-up. Before we get into today's content, just a couple of basic announcements that our next TAM customer webinars you see on the screen there will be on January 11th on the topic of unlocking AI and generative AI with VMware's private AI. That was something that was announced at Explore recently, and I think it'll be a great topic. As I mentioned earlier, we want you to benefit from these sessions by interacting with the speaker. So if you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom and we'll address them during the webinar. At the end of today's session, you'll be prompted to fill out a simple 2-question survey related to the value you receive from this session and also any topic suggestions for future sessions. Your completion of this survey is a very valuable gift back to us. We'd greatly appreciate you filling that out. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and your TAM can make the recording link available to you. After a few months, the recording does go publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. So that brings us to today's speaker and topic. Adam Cheney is a VMware cybersecurity specialist and is going to be giving us some practical information about securing vSphere environments. Based on the registration numbers, it looks like this is an interesting topic to many, so I'll get out of the way and turn it over to Adam.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. Hey, good morning, everyone. Great to meet you all. This is awesome. And thank you all the TAMs for setting this up and making it happen. Really excited about today's meeting. So as Andy said, I'm Adam Cheney. I'm a VMware cybersecurity specialist. Came here about 2 years ago. In fact, I originally came here as a TAM, but I came out of DoD. I had spent the prior 10 years to that transition. It's working throughout DoD, working with the Army, acutely focused on cybersecurity. Spent a lot of that time hardening vSphere environments to classified, to secret, to top secret standards. Since I developed this sort of consultation we're going to run through today in about an hour. I've done this with over 200 VMware customers now, some of the biggest military, biggest financial organizations in the world. So this should be pretty dense, pretty high energy. So I hope you guys get your pencils out. So here we go. Here's just a legal disclaimer. You guys know the drill here. Don't sue us, please. We might talk about some tech that's not quite available yet. But as always, work with your TAM. So diving straight into it, I just want to start out of the gate with some basic stuff. Earlier this year, you guys are all TAM customers. You're all familiar with this ESXi ARGS ransomware exploit, and you worked with your TAM to sort it out and to mitigate it, right? So we don't really need to get into this probably. I do want to point out, like, you're going to have this deck, you're going to have the recording as a follow-up. So if you have any questions, you can dig into this stuff on your own. But I included the fix here for everyone. I included the official VMware blog about the situation if you guys still have outstanding questions. One thing I do want to talk about is the VMware security advisories. So we publish these VMware security advisories whenever a known vulnerability ought to be made public, or when a public vulnerability, there's been a significant change to it. You guys, most of you are probably subscribed to this, but one thing I'm learning a lot of customers are doing instead is, if they have like an infrastructure team kind of email distribution list, they're subscribing that to it instead. That way, as people come and go to the organization, it's sort of future-proof, right? Now, as a cybersecurity specialist, I always advocate for these VMware security advisories with the infrastructure folks, with the vSphere, VCF teams, because fundamentally speaking, as VCF or vSphere system owners, we're charged with the responsibility of keeping this environment available. And staying abreast, staying informed of these security advisories directly facilitates that effort. So those are great. Also, if you guys are using Skyline, Skyline can help us a lot as well. With that ESXi ARGS exploit I talked about a minute ago, this was exploiting a vulnerability we published 2 years prior. In other words, this vulnerability, there's 2 years of runway for a valid exploit to hit the street, So in a perfect world, we all stay fully informed. We all take action on these things as soon as we can. Next item, vSphere security configuration guide. So these are cool. If I go to this web page, it's public facing. I have vSphere 7. Let me do this. I have a vSphere 7 guide over here. vSphere 6 is end of support, end of life. So vSphere 7, vSphere 8, and I can come here and I can grab this link. There's other tools in here too that are really useful. So come check it out. But I want to talk about this SCG, the security configuration guide, which I have open. Oh, let me just show you this. When you come in here, there's just a download link. So you'll download it and you're basically left with a spreadsheet that looks like this. And what you're seeing on this spreadsheet is a long list of environmentally specific security controls that we expect customers to come in and knock out after ESXi or after vCenter server appliance comes into production. Here's the thing, and I want everyone to be abundantly aware of this. ESXi, Photon OS, any VMware OVA appliance you're going to deploy is natively hardened out of the box. It's natively secure. It includes the bare essential software and tools required to fulfill its role. Everything on this spreadsheet, these are environmentally specific controls, things that kind of can't be defined out of the factory for us. So there's about 140 checks here. I'll go to this controls tab. I'll see 140 checks. Let's just say I'm just getting started. I'm brand new to this. So I want to sort by my P0s, my most consequential settings. And I'll scroll down and I'll notice, for example, ESXi lockdown mode. I have no idea what that is. So I got a description right here. I have some discussion, gives me a little bit of context so I can get a little bit informed. I see installation default value, and I'll notice that the VMware's suggested value is different, right? So I'll want to review this. What's also cool, and this is new, they added for the vSphere 8 guide, is that they include a column here for what the potential functional impact might be if this value's changed. And so this can be pretty helpful. Now, some of you are going to have a pretty big environment, 50, 100, 500, 7,000 ESXi hosts, right? So in cases like this, it's worth investing the time to automate these otherwise repeatable tasks. So we include two columns here for like Power CLI assessment examples, so I can rapidly iterate through all my hosts and passively baseline or assess where I'm at. And we also have the remediation examples. Another thing I want to show you too, I just learned about this like actually last night, is with a new vSphere 8 security configuration guide. If I go to this tools folder, we include all these PowerShell scripts for you. So if I grab this audit ESXi one, look, we built out the automation like for a lot of these checks for you. So this can save us a ton of time. I was excited about this because with the former vSphere 7 one, this wasn't included. And going through this process, even just passively baselining things, is very arduous, very time consuming. So the exciting part about this stuff, if you implement this, I guarantee this will in fact make your VCF and your vSphere environment more secure, and it will cost no money for you to implement for 99% of these checks. I think there's like one I can think of that might cost money. And we'll get into that, in fact, in a little bit. So next item. For those of you who've gone through this hardening process, whether you're within DoD or subject to DISA, and you've implemented STIGs, security technical implementation guides, if you've invested in CIS benchmarks, or if you've used VMware's free security configuration guides, you're already aware how difficult of a process and time consuming of a process this can be. There's also lots of opportunities along the way to break production. Like what's going to happen when I turn on strict lockdown mode, right? There's some nuance with some of these things. So I just want to make everyone aware that you're not alone. We do have your back. We do have a bench of security architects you guys may choose to retain to not just do a security gap assessment, you know, against NIST 853, against NIST 800-171, or a broader zero trust assessment, but these folks, these experts can actually roll up their sleeves, get on the keyboard with you and knock out the hardening in your unique environment. So good for everyone to be aware. We have been seeing a lot of ransomware in the news this year. I can probably hammer off like 10 incidents right now without even thinking about it. But we saw Clorox, we saw Boeing recently, MGM, Caesars, Johnson Controls. I was just reading last night, Lockbit encrypted this bank in West Virginia, Citizens Bank of West Virginia. It's proliferating like crazy. And this example here, Ion Group, I included this for you guys. You guys will have this link. I only talk about this stuff because it's in the public news. But why this particular one's relevant to you is because Lockbit ransomware group, we saw them actually get into Ion Group. It's kind of like a SaaS derivatives trading platform. They encrypted most of their vSphere environment. We saw at MGM, a lot of their vSphere environment got encrypted. Lockbit, this is important because Lockbit, this one group occupies like 26% of the entire ransomware industry at this point. And I included this link for you here, this darkfeed.io. This is a pretty cool tool, but it's paid for now. But anyway, what you guys care about, Lockbit, their stats are through the roof, right? Among many other reasons for this, two key factors contributing to Lockbit's prevalence is due to how highly evasive their tactics and techniques can be, as well as how evasive the malware they often use is. In fact, we wrote this interesting blog article here, our threat analysis unit, on a handful of things that we're observing Lockbit do in the wild. This is a great read. Strongly recommend you guys come back and comb through this. But for the sake of time, one specific point I want to highlight for you here is how we're observing Lockbit once they get into an environment. We're observing them disable endpoint security agents, whatever they might be. In some cases, take it further and they straight up delete these endpoint security tools out of System 32. This is called evasion. Evading detection. And for any attacker coming into your environment or an environment, evading detection is always going to be a principal order of business, probably the first order of business, because the longer I can evade detection, the longer I can persist in the environment. Get off this Windows 10 laptop and find that pot of gold. Evading detection is a really big deal. In fact, I was reading this book yesterday. It's like a 400-page book on the subject, just about evading EDRs, right? So it's a big deal. This is exactly why we do defense in depth, right? But not here to scare you guys. You know, I just mostly want to advocate for our TAU because they're publishing great things. In terms of highly evasive malware, we have a weapon in our arsenal. It's available to us. It's called the malware sandbox. And VMware, we have the only malware sandbox in the industry that can be natively afforded to your VCF or your vSphere environment. What is the malware sandbox? Why is it relevant? So you guys all have endpoint security already. You guys have great tools. You have McAfee, Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, right? The Symantec. There's tons of great ones. But what's true among all of these? As an endpoint agent co-located with a guest operating system running on 4 CPUs, 16 gigs of RAM, it has no choice but to be performative. It has to be fast, it has to be light. And to be performative, all of these, every single one in the industry, all of these endpoint security agents with respect to malware are going to do what's called static analysis. Static analysis of potential malware artifacts. So think about it as a PDF or a DLL or an Excel spreadsheet with a macro tries to get written to disk. Carbon Black or Microsoft Defender is basically going to take a thumbprint of that artifact, and it's going to cross-check that thumbprint against a database of thumbprints of known threats. And if there's a match, I know what it is. I know it's bad. I'll quarantine it. I'll move on with my life. It's very fast, and it usually gets us the right answer. Maybe 90% of the time, this will get us the right answer. But for some organizations out there, 90% of the time is simply not good enough. So we use dynamic analysis. Now, what our malware sandbox does, we'll tie it natively into your vSphere environment or VCF environment, and it will instead do what's called dynamic analysis. So we'll basically take a copy of that PDF before it tries to get written to disk, detonate it, elicit every single behavior it may or may not be capable of, and determine the ground truth, irrespective of a thumbprint, what this thing's capable of, how bad is it. So just want to make the group aware of this. Most people aren't talking about it yet. I want to move along to this very big theme, gigantic theme. It's called the principle of least privilege. You and I, everyone on this call has been confronting this theme since the beginning of our careers. There are 400-page books written on hardening Active Directory. So I'm just going to hit on a few specific items this morning as it relates to your vSphere environment. Your vSphere environment is probably associated with Active Directory. You're probably doing domain authentication to get into it, whether that's on-prem or it's Azure AD or something. And this is in accordance with all industry guidance. VMware security configuration guides, DIS and STIGs, everyone says that you should do this. I will tell you guys, of the 5 different ransomware incidents that I've worked on since I came here just 2 years ago, they took, those customers in terms of recovery and rebuild took very drastic measures with respect to how vSphere associates with Active Directory. Some of them have cut the cord entirely, and they've reverted completely to local authentication only with remote accounting, remote syslog, audit trail, stuff like that, of course. Or what they would do is they would deploy a separate, completely isolated domain controller that only served management infrastructure, and that our other users, other laptops and inventory, they weren't interfacing with this one. In fact, there was really no way to get into or out of it. This is actually what we do in DoD in a lot of environments. This is how I can mitigate. I just want you guys to consider this. I'm not asserting you do one thing or the other. I want you guys to consider the fact that Active Directory can often present a very gigantic attack vector. And there's things we can do to mitigate that risk. In fact, we saw at MGM, they had over 100 ESXi hypervisors encrypted, right? And so you're not going to tell me that that was 100 unique root passwords. Active Directory was certainly involved in that sort of spread, right? So just things for us to consider here. Second item, multi-user administrative accounts. So you have root into ESXi, root and into VCSA, administrator at vSphere.local to log into vSphere. These can quickly become what's called a multi-user administrative account. I've been to customers before where 28 different people had these passwords. And when conditions like this exist, I don't have what's called non-repudiation. I can't guarantee that was in fact Andy who performed that action. 27 of his peers also had the password. So in a perfect world, 1 or 2 people have those passwords, maybe a director. Otherwise, everyone else is not just mandated by policy, but objectively forced to use their unique administrative account that has the least amount of privileges required to fulfill their role. We'll go further into that in a minute. But this likewise goes for service accounts. So you have third-party services tied into vSphere, whether it's vRealize Login Site, VROPS, NSX, Veeam, backup and replication, right? In a perfect world, all of these third-party services use their unique single-purpose service account with the least amount of privileges required to fulfill their role. In fact, I worked one ransomware incident just about 2 years ago now, where administrator at vSphere.local got compromised. And keep in mind, guys, when that happens, it's game over, right? That's a system owner account. But this happened, and because that account was also used to tie in their online backup and replication solution, as soon as the ransomware finished encrypting the entire vSphere environment, all the VMDKs, vSwap files, everything, it leached into the online backups and encrypted all of them as well. So it's a little bit out of scope, but this is worthwhile for everyone. With respect to backups, of course, we have online backups. Consider whether or not they're immutable. They probably should be. Consider what degree of our backups we're storing are actually offline or out of band. This customer, they didn't have any, so they were pretty screwed. Consider whether our backup and replication solution needs to be associated with AD, or if I can survive with local authentication. And then continuity of operations plans, disaster recovery plans. Ensure that we're not just doing tabletop exercises, but that we're in fact physically exercising these plans on a biannually, maybe quarterly basis. Because what happens in real life is often different from what we wrote down on paper. Last item. Spent a long time on this slide. Last item here is MFA, multi-factor authentication. I recommend, you guys all have some form of this tech in your orgs. I recommend this be afforded to every single asset possible, to include vSphere. Now, affording MFA to vSphere, we can do this. I see this done one of 3 ways, and I'm going to rapidly iterate through them right now. But I'll just also point out with vSphere 7, we can use things like Duo, Okta, RSA, smart cards. And with vSphere 8, I think it was update 2 that just came out about a month or two ago. We can now do Azure AD. So that's pretty
Yeah.
sweet.
And one
So
included Okta. Update 1, right?
perfect.
Included Okta. Yeah.
Thanks, Andy. So we can, of course, configure MFA directly on vCenter, right? Like it's our gatekeeper. Alternatively, because some people aren't willing to do that. Imagine if we had an administrative pool of jump hosts, like there were like Windows Server 2022s, or maybe they're Horizon VDI. I have like an administrative pool of VDI. And by the way, this is what we did in DoD. On that administrative pool of VDI, this is where I would install all my admin tools. I'd log into it, I'd MFA into it with entirely separate administrative credentials. All my admin tools are installed here, nowhere else. They're hardened to a DISA STIG compliant baseline. And I've firewalled, or ideally I'll micro segment my network to the extent that this pool of 10 or 20 VDIs, they're the only IP addresses on the planet that are capable of originating a connection into vSphere over any port or protocol. And that can drastically reduce vSphere's general exposure to risk. Because we're creating a choke point, right? We could take it one step further, because a lot of you own a privileged access management solution. Think of Thycotic, Beyond Trust, CyberArk. There's lots of good ones out there. So what I see a lot of customers doing with CyberArk, for example, is they require MFA to log into it. Andy Bidlin at 11 a.m. Thursday morning requests a one-time root password to ESXi host 7 at vCenter 3, right? There's an audit trail for that series of events. He gets his one-time root password, logs in, does his work, logs out. CyberArk immediately rolls that password. There's an audit trail for that full series of events. And then, like I said before, I'll firewall or I'll microsegment, ideally, my environment to the extent that CyberArk's the only way into vSphere. What we're doing, guys, is we're creating a gigantic choke point. That's what we're doing. Andy, any specific questions on this subject? That was big.
Not on this subject. There was one from before related to the priority of the security configuration guide. We addressed that. There is a column in there that's intended to help you understand what are the most critical ones to address first with a P0, and then moving on from there. There's a question here about, this goes back a slide or two ago, but what are your thoughts on the exec installed only setting?
Oh, great question, but I don't want to ruin it. So
All right.
hang tight.
We'll save that one. And
Yeah.
then in the middle of going, this is more of maybe some feedback. In the middle of going through this process now for vSphere 8, that would be the security configuration guide is what this was relative to. Our TAM was able to help us get the information we needed to accomplish this.
Good.
One thing I'd like to see with Power CLI is where to find these in the host profile settings. It's easier to do host profiles rather than running scripts each time you add a host. So maybe some feedback for the team or whatever, how what kind of configuration tools could be used other than a script.
Yeah, so this is a great point, and in fact, I overlooked this earlier. So this is gonna apply to pretty much all of you guys. Perhaps you're already familiar with vSphere Auto Deploy. You're already familiar with host profiles. What we can do is we can knock out that 140 row spreadsheet I showed you on one host, and a lot of these settings can be done inside of the host profile. Or what we can do is after we apply the settings, we can extract them into what's called a host profile. And then what we can do is we can apply that host profile to all my other hosts or all the other hosts in the cluster. So instead of doing it 10 times, I only had to do it once. And that can save us a ton of time. I can't guarantee that's going to grab 100% of the configs, but I know it'll grab the majority of them. Host profiles are fantastic. All right, exec installed only is coming up, but I want to hammer through a few specific vSphere settings now. These are all on the security configuration guide. They're all in DISA STIGs. And I handpicked these ones, these few. We'll go through like 4 of them. I handpicked these because while they're very consequential, these are otherwise low-hanging fruit, things all of you can start taking action on as soon as Monday morning. And this first one here is called host lockdown mode. Host lockdown mode is a setting on ESXi, and by default, it's configured to disabled. The reason why it's configured to disabled is because as soon as you set this to normal, which VMware definitely recommends, what's going to happen is all direct access to the ESXi hypervisor is disallowed, unless it originates from vCenter server itself. So again, another choke point, right? You guys would all maybe generally agree that we don't need broad 360 access into our ESXi hosts. But in some cases, we do need access, right? So once I set this to normal lockdown mode, we also give you the ability to then define what's called an exception users list. And the few users on this list are the ones who can subvert this control, like root. Maybe you guys are doing domain authentication into ESXi, which I don't personally recommend. Maybe you have a third-party backup solution that needs direct access. Maybe you guys are doing some vulnerability scanning. There's a bunch of good tools out there, Tripwire, Qualys, Rapid7. I've used Tenable, and I can tell you that Tenable has a vSphere plugin, so you guys can do credentialed vulnerability scans into all of your ESXi. So maybe what you'll do is, or what you've already done, is create a read-only sort of service account, local auth into ESXi, so that Tenable can do credential scans into it. This list of exception users, they're the only ones who can subvert this control. Now, finally, there's strict lockdown mode. And I've only ever personally seen this inside of DoD top secret environments. This basically means if you don't have physical access, you're never getting access. And for probably most of you, almost all of you, that's not a realistic standard. Next item, SSH into ESXi is disabled by default. And I hope that that's still the case at your organization. Maybe you have a bona fide reason to leave it open indefinitely. That's up to you and to your TAM. What I have seen is some customers will keep it open for convenience. And think about it. If it's convenient for you guys, it's going to be convenient for your attacker as well, because SSH port 22 is most attackers' primary order of business, to be frank. And we'll get into that in a couple minutes. So keep it disabled. If you have to keep it enabled, what we can do at the very least is configure ESXi's local firewall to at least constrain which IP addresses we're willing to accept port 22 connections to come in from. ESXi's local firewalls, in my personal opinion, the number one thing you guys can take advantage of right now to make a difference in the shortest amount of time. So you guys log into vSphere, click on any hypervisor, go to the config tab, and you'll scroll down to firewall. There's like 20 services in there. API service interface, SNMP, NTP, DNS is a big one. DNS is a very common means of exfiltration of data out of an environment. And SSH, I recommend you firewall them all to the best of your ability. Just bear in mind, you have to do your due diligence. It's really easy to break production here. But here's the thing. As vSphere system owners, as VCF system owners, we're charged with keeping this environment available, right? And we know it better than anyone else. But also, too, your vSphere VCF environments are subject to some firewall somewhere upstream, and that InfoSec team, NetSec team has probably done a great job configuring it. But as vSphere system owners, we can take our fate into our own hands here. We can take some ownership and configure this firewall for ourselves. And if you potentially configure like a redundant rule, it's not going to hurt anything. It won't slow anything down. We're just reducing gaps. That's all. So SSH, configure who you're willing to accept connections to come in from. DNS, configure which IP addresses you're willing to allow port 53 connections to go out to, etc. These next two, these are both self-evident session timeouts. Not only do I want to time out idle SSH sessions after 3 to 5 minutes, but perhaps after 60 minutes, I want to force users to re-authenticate. After 60 minutes of inactivity, I want Brian to re-authenticate, reveal to me he still is who he said he was. And then max login attempts. These are a blessing and a curse. When I don't need them, they're a pain in the neck. When I do need them, I'm really, really happy I had them in place. Promiscuous mode. is a setting on a vSphere standard switch. It's a setting on a vSphere distributed switch port group. This is disabled by default, and we recommend you always keep this disabled, because as soon as you set this to enabled, you're allowing everything else on that standard switch or everything else on that distributed switch port group to see all traffic. There are some ways to mitigate this if you want to put in the extra work, but if we don't know what it's for, if we don't understand clearly our bona fide need for it, keep it disabled. I bring this one up because some organizations will use like third-party network monitoring or security tools, and they're pretty much always going to require this. Next one. Here we go. So,
Hey, Adam,
yes.
maybe I could touch on a couple questions before you continue on.
Yep.
You're all right with that? Back to lockdown mode. Is there a point to lockdown mode with, for example, only root allowed if there are no other local users other than root?
I don't think so. But talk to your TAM for the official answer on that, because I know ESXi has other accounts in it, like DCUI. I think maybe Mux is the name of another account. There are other accounts as well.
How about leveraging Workspace ONE for authentication?
Yeah, great idea. Definitely recommend it. I don't know
Now,
specifically how. I'm not a tacit expert with that.
yeah, I'm not sure that we've got a solution for that relative to vCenter currently. I think the ones
Yeah, we can
that you listed off before are the main options there.
Yeah, okay. I might have been conflating that with like Identity Manager, which ships with a lot of our tools like VROPS and NSX. But anyway.
Yep. And then let's see. If using password management system, would it still be prudent to disconnect from AD integration and have it manage local passwords?
It'd still be worthwhile to investigate that. Yep.
Okay. There was one question about, I'm suspecting you don't have an answer for this, but yeah, okay, somebody has helped me out here. We were told by Cisco that we should not be using host profiles in our Cisco HyperFlex environment because it breaks it. Do you guys agree with that? And so one of our other guests here, coming from an infrastructure of over 5,000 UCS blades, host profiles is a must. So yeah, we probably don't have any information that's going to help there. That's pretty good. You're going to probably have to flush out with Cisco what it is that breaks and how to address that.
Well, I think, yeah, and you kind of answered it right there at the end, Andy, too, with hyperconverged infrastructure, Dell, VxRail, Cisco, whatever. With BCF in some cases, there's going to be an added additional degree of nuance with some of these hardening settings, and you're going to want to consult them for their guidance. So we avoid breaking anything.
I agree. All right, exec installed only. We're waiting for it.
Here we go. You guys are going to love this slide. So let's say hypothetically, some weirdo has figured out some novel way to pierce through my multi-million-dollar defense in depth strategy. And now I have malware knocking on vSphere's door, maybe more specifically ransomware knocking on vSphere's door. These four settings right here are basically our absolute last line of defense. They're our last hope of keeping this stuff out. And they have a pretty synergistic effect between each other. So if we have TPM 2.0 chips installed in our UCS B series blades or Dell hypervisors, whatever, we can dust these things off. We can enable UEFI secure boot. And what this is going to do is ensure that all the code loaded at boot is both trusted and secure. It's just like Windows Secure Boot, if you're more familiar with that. But what's great here in the case of vSphere is that your hypervisors are then required to attest to their state on a routine basis. And if any of this code has since been tampered with, that hypervisor will no longer attest. vCenter will quarantine it out and prevent the further spread of a potential problem. Very powerful. If you don't own these chips, I think they're like $40 a piece. Otherwise, just include them on your next hardware refresh. That was the one item I said that might cost money in that security configuration guide. Next item. VIB acceptance levels. So you guys are probably all familiar with what a VIB is, a vSphere installation bundle. It's just like a Linux tarball. And this is how I get little pieces of software or drivers to install inside of ESXi. By default, this is set to partner supported. That's probably where you are right now. That's probably where you're going to have to stay. What this means is that in order for a VIB to install, it must bear a digital signature from a known trusted partner. Excuse me, like Dell, Cisco, HP Enterprise. What this means is that your new friend Adam, because he's a nerd, he can't just write you a VIB to help you solve a problem. It won't have a digital signature. It won't be allowed to install unless you log in as root. And you log in as root and you run a command that's like ESXCLI software VIB install blah 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 -- force. You ran the command as root, you appended -force, you're gonna subvert this control. And I want you guys to keep this in mind. But for now, in order to really give this thing some teeth, once these first sort of prerequisites are met, then we can finally log into the CLI and configure what's called exec installed only. This is going to be the piece of the puzzle here that actually prohibits the execution of any custom code inside of ESXi. And with vSphere 8, a portion of exec installed only or a form of it is already configured by default. I think I was reading that the other day. For more detailed information than that on exec installed only, contact your TAM. And your TAM's welcome to reach out to me, and I'll support however I can. But we have your backs. My favorite part about this slide is if you already have the chips, this will not cost you any money to implement, will in fact keep ransomware out of your environment. Unless, like I said before, they log in as root. Because if you log in as root, you're a system owner, and it's just a matter of time, maybe over a long period of time, for root to slowly and quietly unwind these controls, but that's very unlikely. Another thing I want to mention too, back on this SSH slide, did you guys know it's impossible to execute ransomware without shell access to ESXi? So keep this thing disabled. It's also impossible to execute ransomware when these settings are in place. So let's try to get them enforced if we can. All right, moving along. I'm willing to bet 100% of your vSphere environments, your VCF environments are not directly exposed to the public internet. I cannot open a vSphere web client into it from my house in the Northeast right now. I probably have to MFA, ideally through a VPN /firewall /several firewalls. Maybe because of my identity, I land on a specific VLAN, and only from that VLAN can I then originate connections into vSphere. Maybe that'd be pretty sweet. What this means, this is the case at 99.9% of VCF and vSphere customers. They're never directly exposed to the public internet. What this means is whenever you see ESXi and ransomware in the news, some degree of lateral movement across the environment was always required. Now, I'm going to very simply and generally break down a timeline of what this looks like based off my past experience with VMware customers. How it starts. Through a phishing email or through an HTTPS web page, either an uneducated user or a tired admin, they have a lapse in judgment. They click on something they probably shouldn't have. And what happens next is lightweight stage 1 malware gets downloaded to the endpoint. Maybe it's an initial access broker, and they're going to sell that access to someone like Lockbit. I don't know. One of 150 different ways somehow evades endpoint security detection or deletes it entirely. And then command and control gets established. Command and control from that sort of patient zero, that Windows laptop or whatever, back to the attacker gets established. What are my next instructions? Well, your next instructions are to get off of this laptop because I'm certain I'm not going to find any real value here. I'm looking for something consequential, something monetizable, like an Azure tenant, like a vSphere environment or a domain controller. So I'm going to move laterally. And to do this, an attacker is going to generally focus on a few specific TCP ports to do it, like 3389 RDP, port 22 SSH, SMB. And that's not just Adam, your new friend, saying that. That's every vendor in the industry is in agreement on that. And an attacker focuses on these specific TCP ports for two principal reasons. A, they're abundantly available in any environment on the planet. They're exposed everywhere. And The other reason for that is they're used so routinely for perfectly legitimate purposes that an attacker's confident they're going to be able to blend in to that otherwise very high volume of normal syslog traffic noise. So they'll move laterally. They'll do some nmap along the way. They'll do some discovery, and they'll find out there's a vSphere environment running. So I'll get to the domain controller, exploit it miraculously, somehow add myself to the domain admin's OU. And for some strange reason, the domain admin's OU is bound to the vSphere cryptographic admin's role, and I'm in. But I'm not going to encrypt yet. It's too soon. I'm going to start exfiltrating data, probably over something like DNS. And I'll do this slowly. I'll do this quietly over a long period of time to avoid triggering any sort of network traffic 500 gig spike or anything like that. Once I have a compelling or a persuasive amount, that's when I unleash the encryption. That's when I make the environment unavailable and demand money if they want to gain it back. So I'm going to show you guys some really cool tech now to help us start addressing this lateral security problem. But I'm going to start first with what I know everyone here is abundantly familiar with: a perimeter firewall. This perimeter firewall has been in front of our organization for the last 30 years. It's still there today. It's probably always going to be there. This thing's the gate in front of our castle. But since the beginning of time, and still today, in fact, in order for our business or our organization to interoperate with the outside world, this perimeter firewall has always had to be just a little bit coarse. For example, I have to allow email to come in and out of it. I don't have a choice. I have to allow HTTPS to come in and out of it. And you can do quite a few different goofy things over that encrypted tunnel. So what we saw pretty quickly back in the day is if a threat ever made it through this thing, I didn't have much beyond my firewall to stop it. If the threat made it inside back in the day, I was left relying exclusively on like Norton Antivirus 1996. Some of you remember that. Maybe I had some inter-VLAN routing constraints, which isn't really security at all. Which is why if a threat ever made it inside, I was in very, very serious trouble. So you and I and the rest of the industry adapted to this problem. About 10 years ago, we started opening up our wallets and buying a bunch more of these firewalls, but this time instead, we started deploying them internally. Internally, we started defining these security zones. And while this was very expensive, this was a necessary step in the right direction. Because as you all can see here from my little elementary example, if a threat were to ever come inside of one of these zones, I've probably just significantly reduced its ability to move laterally here by up to 66%. And anyone would agree that that's worth the price tag. But what we're struggling with today, outside of all the architectural and financial problems with this, more relevant to you folks on the call, these security zones can be very, very big. I could have my whole business separated into 2 security zones. I could have my entire VCF environment subject to a single security zone, maybe. I could have 1,000 workloads inside of 1 security zone. Let's just say right here, what you see on the screen here we go. What you see on the screen here, this is just a /24 network. Very real world, common use case. This security zone is a /24 network. It's a layer 2 broadcast domain. So once a threat makes it inside of this space, what is left in its way to limit its ability to move laterally? What if it's not even leaving an ESXi hypervisor? What do I have left standing in its way then? I'm not doing any routing. I'm not subject to any layer 3 enforcement, right? So what this means is I'm kind of back in my original situation again, aren't I? I'm left now relying exclusively on my endpoint security agents as a single point of failure, which is a extremely desperate position I know none of you guys want to be in. So what VMware has done for you all to help us start addressing this problem, what about security within the zone? What about security within the software-defined data center? What we've done, and this is totally exclusive to us, by the way, is without any endpoint agents whatsoever, without any network changes at all, we're able to push out some advanced security VIBs to all your hypervisors and run as software an enterprise-grade next-gen firewall on the VNIC of every single workload. And this is how VMware is exclusively positioned to help you guys finally achieve true threat containment down to patient zero. There's never been a good modern way to do this. So it's something I always advocate for in any defense and vSphere defense in depth consultation I do, because this finally gives me the ability to define rigid, impenetrable guardrails that dictate specifically how all of my workloads are allowed to interoperate with each other. And the fact is, most of my network traffic in the software-defined data center is never going up to some sort of firewall or security enforcement point. A lot of it's never even leaving an ESXi hypervisor. And the bottom line is, I'm sure you'd all agree, most of my workloads don't really have any business being able to talk to each other, at least not on 65,000 different ports, right? And so we should start constraining that. We should start limiting how these workloads are allowed to coexist together. So we turn this tool in, which, by the way, would be an additional security investment you might choose to make. We'll start observing, start learning all of your layer 4 through 7 traffic flows, and all these menacing red lines are unaccounted for traffic flows that exist in my software-defined data center. And I can start automatically creating policy to eliminate a lot of this stuff that is not necessary or not essential. So very powerful. Hit up your TAM if you want to hear more about this, because it's a tool that, frankly, a lot of our customers really need this.
Hey,
Moving
Adam,
along. Yeah, send it.
just staying on that one for 1 second. And I think it's a, well, I'll let you address it here. Aren't you subject to local OS firewalls?
Local OS firewalls, there's like Windows filtering platform, there's Linux IP tables, but those are just basic layer 4 firewalls that are commingled with a guest operating system. They're not real firewalls, but they can help.
Got it. And back a topic or so, when you were talking about it was the 4 lists, the 4 different settings to change and related to SSH and things like that. Are there triggers to monitor if these settings are changed in Skyline or another tool? So like on your SSH, I think was where this one was coming up actually. And I could say yes, to a degree, there is a Skyline finding related to SSH being on. There's a Skyline finding related to those timeouts. And so those are good places to keep an eye on. Also, you could probably build out an REOps dashboard if you have got that in your environment that could probably help with some of this and or a report related to that. Any other thoughts on that though, Adam?
No, Andy, you nailed it. Also, we should be doing remote syslog, like info level syslog on all of our ESXi hosts. So as these changes are made, we can see by who and when, and maybe if any of these are super important to us, like exec installed only. In fact, here's a keep this in mind. I think in fact check me, by the way, but I think to turn off exec installed only, I think that might require a reboot. So when you maybe hypothetically they did this at a organization before they encrypted 100 hosts. If they rebooted 100 hosts before executing ransomware, that should throw red flags in your SOC.
Yeah.
Because we're doing remote syslog. Those are things to think about as well.
What about, can we switch to UFI secure boot without reinstalling the ESXi?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So work with your TAM on that one. I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Okay. All right. Very good. We're good for now.
Cool. We do much more advanced security than just this hypervisor level ESXi kernel firewalling and IDS IPS, but I'm going to sum it up in this one slide. I think this will be my last one, and maybe if you want, Andy, we can open it up. But let me sum this all up for everyone here. This advanced security tech, I'm going to do this in one slide and in a very relatable way. So just imagine we have this SQL Server VM, right? It's running somewhere in our environment. Of course, it's behind our cutting edge firewall. Of course, it's got our industry leading endpoint security on it, of which there are many. But as you guys may already be aware, like myself, your whole SOC or InfoSec team, we're all paid a salary because bad actors figure out new ways to subvert these controls on a pretty regular basis. And in fact, we saw at MGM, this was subverted with something as simple as a phone call, which is why the first layer of protection we're going to afford this workload is what's called distributed firewall. And we're doing this from the ESXi kernel, right? Not the guest OS. So as you can see from this concentric circle, what I'm doing here is I'm disallowing the usage of all non-essential ports and protocols I know this thing has no business using. In other words, I'm reducing its attack surface, and this is a very big deal. It's foundational, it's necessary. But the limitation of any form of firewalling from any vendor, it doesn't matter who, whether it's a firewall access control list, whether it's micro segmentation, is that no matter what, you're always going to have some exposure. This is the consequence of being connected to the network. Never going to turn off RDP. How am I going to feed and nurture this thing? SMB, not turning that off. The SQL Server, in order to fulfill its role in production, must have some ports and protocols that remain open, which is why we're also going to layer in IDS, IPS, signature-based detection and prevention. This is next-gen firewalling on the VNIC of every single workload. This is what's going to give me the ability here to actually qualify the content of these limited conversations that I still allow to exist. Very powerful stuff. But if you think about it, the limitation of any form of next-gen firewalling, and it doesn't matter which vendor you get it from, VMware, Fortinet, Checkpoint, doesn't matter. As the fact is, as soon as a new 0 day hits the street or becomes public, which could be 3 days out or 3 weeks or a year after it was developed, once the 0 day hits the street, there's always going to be some delay, some lag between that point in time and the point in time when your vendor publishes signatures that were curated to detect it. So next-gen firewalling will never give us an ability to account for unknown bad traffic patterns, unknown exploits, or more behavioral type of security-centric deviations from established network traffic baseline. Think about it. So that's why we're also going to layer in our acquisition of Lastline here and also afford this workload behavioral network traffic analysis. This is AI and machine learning type stuff. It's going to baseline all of the network traffic in your entire environment, learn what normal looks like, and then start alerting you on the few security-centric deviations from that baseline we think you need to be aware of. What does that mean? Think of things like anomalous RDP connections. So I've never seen that source talk to that destination over 3389 before. That's not bad, right? But maybe it's weird. And I'll stick that detail, I'll save it in my pocket for later because that might contribute to a broader story. Horizontal, vertical port scans, no big deal. Like your network engineers are probably routinely using this, but so are attackers to do discovery of an environment. So when I see that, I'll take that detail, stick it in my pocket because I'm down the road, it may contribute to a threat campaign that's materializing across my broader environment. What about domain generation algorithms, DNS tunneling? I have no idea if that's good or bad. So we layer that in as well. This is where we also give you that full system emulation malware sandbox to do dynamic analysis on all your workloads to complement what your endpoint security is already doing. Finally, I'm out of breath. This is a lot of tech. I've realized that. In fact, this is tech I would otherwise get through 4 or 5 different vendors or 4 or 5 different products at 2 or 3 different vendors. And then what I would have to do, or what my SOC would have to do, is work overtime to normalize and calibrate all the signals they yield into my SIM so that the indicators of compromise I get are things I can actually take action on. Instead of doing all that, we've done it for you. And we've done it for you natively inside of vSphere. Down the road, we should see sensors that can span beyond vSphere as well. This is how we can really help, and I hope that that's kind of evident at this point. To be clear, if it wasn't already, this would be an advanced security investment you may choose to make. Probably pretty obvious why I bring it up on this call. So that's about all I have, folks. Unless there are questions.
So there's one follow-up question to the exec installed only setting, and that is related to what is considered custom. So if there's a solution that runs custom code, is there a way to whitelist that custom code?
I got to read about it.
Yeah, I'm not.
I think what they're looking for is like Python code that Adam wrote to like do a thing. But if it's like a digitally signed bib that's installed, like that's not custom code.
Right. I get the impression that's more the former.
Yeah.
Right. Some sort of internal solution. Yeah. Yeah, that one's going to take a little more digging there, Tom. Sorry. Any other questions? I don't see any unanswered except some appreciation being expressed. So a
Oh,
confirmation question, whether NSX is still needed for microsegmentation.
great question, Christian. So about 18 months ago, we entirely decoupled microsegmentation, actually all of NSX security functionality. Everything I just showed you doesn't require any NSX or overlay networking at all. And there are licenses for it that are a fraction of the cost. You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right, let's see. We got a couple more here. Yep. Tom's going away curious and with work to do, so he's appreciative of that. What about security within the zone? Which product can I use?
Claus, I would reach out to your TAM specifically about distributed firewall. That's the VMware product that we can add on to vSphere to do what I showed you.
And then you showed the audit with Power CLI for 8. Do they have that for 7?
Great question, James. I got to fact check it, but I don't think so. I think that was new with 8. But here, I'll put this link in your answer if you want, and you can go download it. There's a URL. There's a zip file in there. Unzip that and see if the PS1s are in there.
Sebastian, I can barely manage just English alone. I'm so appreciative of you folks that can manage multiple languages, but apparently, Adam, you covered it. You covered it for some non-English speakers as well, which is great. I think DoD, there was a question about DoD at the very beginning, so that acronym wasn't familiar to some, but I think that got answered in line here. Let's see. All right, I think I don't see any other specific questions. All right, very good. So Adam, thanks for helping us finish 2023 strong. This was really useful content that, as some of our guests were already saying, that it gives them something to go act on right away, which is super. And folks, as we mentioned at the beginning, this will be our last one for 2023, but January 11th we'll be back, and we'll be looking at at VMware's private AI solution. So watch for the registration link from your TAM and get signed up for that one, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. All right, have a great rest of your day all. Bye-bye.